The alarm clock buzzed at 5:30 a.m., just like it had every morning for the past 3 weeks. Riley Chen rubbed her tired eyes and rolled out of bed, her body aching from another 14-hour shift at Metro Children's Hospital. As a pediatric nurse, she was used to long days, but lately, the hospital had been short-staffed and everyone was pulling double duties. She stumbled to the kitchen and made her usual cup of coffee, black and strong. The morning news played softly in the background, talking about traffic delays and weather updates. Just another ordinary Tuesday in the city. Riley had been working at the hospital for 8 years now, and she loved her job, even when exhaustion weighed heavy on her shoulders. After a quick shower, she grabbed her nurse's bag and headed out, to her small blue Honda. The drive to work took her through the heart of downtown, past the old brick buildings and newer glass offices. She knew every street corner, every traffic light, every shortcut through the maze of city roads. The day at the hospital started like any other. Riley checked on her young patients, administered medications, and comforted worried parents. There was little Amy recovering from appendix surgery, making jokes even though she was clearly in pain. Then there was 8-year-old Ben, who had broken his arm falling off his bike but kept asking when he could ride again. These moments reminded Riley why she chose nursing. Seeing children bounce back from illness and injury, watching their faces light up when they felt better, hearing their laughter echo through the hospital halls, it made all the long hours worth it. By 7 p.m., Riley's shift was finally over. Her feet hurt, her back ached, and all she wanted was to go home, order some takeout, and watch mindless TV shows until she fell asleep. She said goodbye to her colleagues and walked to the parking garage, her steps slow and heavy. The evening air was crisp as she drove through downtown. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. Traffic was lighter than usual, which was a small blessing after such a long day. She rolled down her window slightly, letting the cool breeze wake her up for the drive home. Riley lived in a quiet neighborhood about 20 minutes from the hospital. It wasn't fancy, but it was home. She was looking forward to a hot bath and maybe calling her sister to catch up. Tomorrow would bring another long shift, but tonight was hers. As she drove down Maple Street, passing the old apartment buildings that had seen better days, Riley was thinking about what to have for dinner. Maybe Chinese food from that place, on the corner, or perhaps she had enough energy to make pasta. These were the simple thoughts occupying her mind when everything changed in an instant. The explosion was so loud it felt like the earth had split open. The sound hit her car like a physical force, making her ears ring and her hands grip the steering wheel tighter. In her rearview mirror, she saw a bright flash of orange light, followed immediately by a massive cloud of black smoke rising into the evening sky. Riley's nursing instincts kicked in before her brain could fully process what had happened. She pulled over to the side of the road and looked back toward the source of the explosion. One of the older apartment buildings was engulfed in flames on the ground floor, and she could see people running out onto the street, some of them clearly injured. Without thinking, she reached into her backseat and grabbed her emergency medical kit, something she always kept in her car, a habit from her nursing school days. Her hands were shaking as she got out of the car, but her training took over. She had dealt with emergencies before, though never anything quite like this. The scene was chaos. People were screaming, some were crying, others were on their phones, calling for help. Riley could hear sirens in the distance, but they sounded far away. Too far away. She ran toward the building, her medical bag in hand, ready to help however she could. That's when she heard it, a sound that made her blood run cold. Above all the noise and confusion, she could hear a child crying. Not just crying, but screaming in terror. The sound was coming from somewhere up high, from one of the upper floors of the burning building. Riley looked up and saw a small face pressed against a second-floor window. A little boy, maybe 6 or 7 years old, was trapped inside while smoke poured out around the window frame. The sight made her stomach drop. Where were the firefighters? Where was the rescue team? She looked around frantically and realized the horrible truth. The fire department hadn't arrived yet. The building was still on fire, and that child was running out of time. Other people on the street were pointing at the window, but everyone seemed frozen, not sure what to do. Riley's mind raced. She wasn't a firefighter. She wasn't trained for this kind of rescue. She was just a tired nurse who wanted to go home and eat dinner. But looking at that little boy's face, she knew she couldn't just stand there and wait. The smell in the air was getting stronger. Not just smoke from the fire, but something else. Something chemical and dangerous. Gas. Riley realized with growing horror that this wasn't just a regular house fire. There had been a gas explosion, which meant there could be another one at any moment. Every logical part of her brain told her to stay back, to wait for the professionals, to keep herself safe. But the child in the window was getting weaker. She could see him starting to slump against the glass, probably from breathing in too much smoke. Riley had always been someone who acted on instinct, especially when it came to helping others. It's what made her a good nurse. When a patient was in crisis, she didn't hesitate. She did whatever needed to be done. And right now, what needed to be done was getting that child out of that building. She looked around the chaotic scene and spotted a construction site next to the apartment building. There, leaning against a work truck, was a tall aluminum ladder. It wasn't perfect, but it might be just long enough to reach the second-floor window. Riley's heart was pounding so hard she could feel it in her throat. She had never done anything like this before. She was afraid of heights on a good day, and this definitely wasn't a good day. But every time she looked up at that window, she saw the little boy getting weaker and weaker. The sirens were getting closer, but not close enough. In a situation like this, seconds mattered. Riley knew from her medical training that smoke inhalation could be deadly very quickly, especially for a small child. She also knew that with gas involved, the whole building could go up in flames at any moment. Taking a deep breath, Riley made the decision that would change everything. She was going to try to save that child, even if it meant putting her own life at risk. She had become a nurse to help people, and right now, this little boy needed help more than anyone she had ever treated. As she ran toward the construction site to get the ladder, Riley's mind was crystal clear despite the chaos around her. She wasn't thinking about being a hero or doing something brave. She was just thinking about a scared little boy who needed someone to help him. And sometimes, that's all it takes to change not just one life, but many lives, in ways you could never imagine. Riley's hands were shaking as she grabbed the aluminum ladder from the construction site. It was heavier than she expected, and for a moment, she wondered if she was completely out of her mind. Here she was, a pediatric nurse who spent her days checking temperatures and giving medications, about to climb a ladder toward a burning building. The ladder scraped against the concrete as she dragged it toward the apartment building. A few people on the street noticed what she was doing and started shouting at her to stop. "Wait for the fire department," someone yelled. "It's too dangerous," called out another voice. But Riley couldn't wait. Every second that passed, the little boy in the window was breathing in more smoke. As she positioned the ladder against the building's brick wall, Riley could feel the heat from the flames below. The fire had started on the ground floor and was spreading fast. She could hear the crackling of burning wood and the sound of glass breaking from the intense heat. The smell of gas was still strong in the air, making her stomach turn. Looking up at the second-floor window, she could see the little boy more clearly now. He couldn't have been more than 6 years old, with dark hair and big, frightened eyes. He was pressing his small hands against the glass, and she could see his mouth moving, probably calling for help, but she couldn't hear him over all the noise. From the fire and the gathering crowd, Riley tested the ladder's stability, making sure it was secure against the wall. Her mind flashed back to her childhood, when her father used to make her climb the big oak tree in their backyard. "Don't look down, Riley," he would say. "Just focus on the next branch." She had been fearless then, but that was a long time ago. Taking a deep breath, Riley started climbing. The first few rungs felt okay, but as she got higher, the ladder began to sway slightly in the evening breeze. Her palms were sweaty, making it harder to grip the metal rungs. About halfway up, she made the mistake of looking down and felt a wave of dizziness wash over her. "I can't do this," she whispered to herself, freezing on the ladder. The ground looked so far away, and she was very aware that one wrong move could send her tumbling down. But then she heard it again. The faint sound of the child crying from above. That sound cut through her fear like a knife. Riley forced herself to keep climbing, one rung at a time, just like her father had taught her. Don't think about falling. Don't think about the fire below. Just focus on getting to that window. Focus on saving that little boy. When she finally reached the window, she was breathing hard, partly from the climb and partly from the smoke that was getting thicker by the minute. The little boy's eyes went wide when he saw her face appear outside his window. He looked relieved but also confused. Who was this stranger trying to get into his apartment? "Hi there," Riley said, trying to keep her voice calm and friendly despite the chaos around them. "My name is Riley and I'm here to help you. Can you open this window for me?" The boy shook his head frantically and pointed toward the interior of the apartment. Riley pressed her face closer to the glass and peered inside. Through the smoke, she could see an elderly woman lying on the floor near the kitchen. The woman wasn't moving, and Riley's heart sank. This wasn't just about saving one person anymore. "Is that your grandma?" Riley asked, and the boy nodded, tears streaming down his face. "Grandma won't wake up," he said, his voice barely audible through the glass. "I tried to shake her, but she won't wake up." Riley's medical training kicked in immediately. The elderly woman had probably been overcome by smoke inhalation and possibly carbon monoxide poisoning from the gas leak. She needed medical attention right away, but first Riley had to figure out how to get into the apartment. The window was old and painted shut. Riley looked around frantically for something to break it with, but she hadn't thought to bring anything. In desperation, she took off her shoe and started hitting the glass with the heel. The window was stronger than she expected, and it took several hits before it finally cracked. "Stand back, sweetie," she told the boy, and he stepped away from the window. Riley hit the glass a few more times until it shattered enough for her to reach through and unlock the window latch. The old window frame was swollen and stuck, but she managed to force it open. The smell that hit her when the window opened was overwhelming. Smoke, gas, and something else that made her gag. The apartment was filling with toxic fumes, and Riley knew they didn't have much time. She climbed through the window, cutting her arm slightly on the broken glass, but she barely noticed. The little boy ran to her immediately, wrapping his arms around her legs. "Please help Grandma," he sobbed. She was making dinner when the loud noise happened, and then she fell down. Riley knelt down and looked the boy in the eyes. "What's your name, sweetheart?" "Tommy," he whispered. "Okay, Tommy. I'm a nurse, which means I help people who are sick or hurt. I'm going to help your grandma, but first I need to get you out of here to safety. Can you be brave for me?" Tommy nodded, wiping his nose with the back of his hand. Riley picked him up and carried him to the window. The ladder was still there, thank goodness, but getting a scared 6-year-old to climb down was going to be tricky. "I'm scared," Tommy said, looking down at the ground far below. "I know you are, and that's okay. Being scared doesn't mean you're not brave. It means you're being brave even when you're scared. I'm going to go down first, okay? Then you're going to climb down to me, one step at a time." Riley climbed out the window and started down the ladder, positioning herself a few rungs below the window. "Okay, Tommy, now it's your turn. Just put one foot on the ladder, then the other. I'm right here, and I won't let you fall." Tommy was shaking, but he did as she said. Step by step, he made his way down the ladder with Riley guiding him. It felt like it took forever, but finally, they reached the ground. A woman from the crowd immediately rushed forward to take Tommy, wrapping him in a blanket and taking him to safety. Riley should have felt relieved, but her job wasn't done. She looked back up at the window, where smoke was pouring out more heavily now. The elderly woman was still inside, still unconscious, and Riley was the only one who could help her. The logical part of her brain screamed at her to stop, to wait for the firefighters who would surely arrive any minute. She had already done more than enough. She had saved the child. But the image of that unconscious woman lying on the floor wouldn't leave her mind. Riley started climbing the ladder again, her legs shaking from exhaustion and fear. This time, she was going back into a building that was getting more dangerous by the minute. The gas smell was stronger now, and she could hear the fire spreading to other parts of the building. As she climbed back through the window, Riley realized that this decision might be the last one she ever made. But sometimes when someone needs help, you don't think about the consequences. You just do what needs to be done, no matter how scared you are. Riley's heart was beating so fast she could hear it in her ears as she climbed back through the window into the smoke-filled apartment. The air was thick and poisonous, making her eyes water and her throat burn. She pulled her shirt up over her, nose and mouth trying to filter out some of the toxic fumes, but it barely helped. The apartment was getting worse by the minute. What had been light smoke when she first entered was now a thick, gray cloud that made it hard to see more than a few feet in any direction. The temperature was rising too, and Riley could feel sweat mixing with the soot on her face. She dropped to her hands and knees, remembering from somewhere that the air was cleaner closer to the floor. Crawling across the worn carpet, she made her way toward where she had seen the elderly woman collapse. The kitchen was where the gas leak had started, and Riley could hear a faint hissing sound that made her stomach clench with fear. "Mrs. Thompson," she called out, hoping to get some response, but there was only silence except for the crackling of flames from somewhere below them. Riley crawled faster, feeling around in the smoky darkness until her hand touched something soft. It was the woman's arm. The grandmother was still unconscious, lying on her side near the stove where she had been cooking dinner when the explosion happened. Riley quickly checked for a pulse and found one, though it was weak and irregular. The woman was still alive, but barely. Her skin was pale and clammy and her breathing was shallow. Riley knew the signs of severe smoke inhalation, and this woman needed fresh air and medical attention immediately. "Come on, Mrs. Thompson. Stay with me," Riley whispered, gently shaking the woman's shoulder. There was no response. The grandmother was a small woman, probably in her 70s, but she would still be heavy enough to make getting her to the window incredibly difficult. Riley tried to lift her, but the woman was dead weight. Panic started to set in as Riley realized how much trouble they were both in. The smoke was getting thicker, the heat was getting more intense, and she could hear new sounds from the building that terrified her. The groaning of stressed wood, and the sound of more glass breaking. She grabbed the woman under her arms and started dragging her across the floor toward the window. It was exhausting work, and every few feet Riley had to stop and gasp for what little clean air she could find. Her lungs were burning, and she was starting to feel dizzy from the lack of oxygen. Halfway to the window, Riley heard something that made her blood freeze, a deep rumbling sound coming from somewhere in the building. It sounded like the whole structure was shifting, getting ready to collapse or explode again. She knew she was running out of time. "Please don't give up on me," she said to the unconscious woman, putting every ounce of strength she had into pulling her toward safety. Her arms ached, her back screamed in pain, and her eyes were streaming tears from the smoke, but she kept going. When they finally reached the window, Riley faced her biggest challenge yet. How was she supposed to get an unconscious person down a ladder? It seemed impossible. She looked out the window and saw that more people had gathered on the street below. Someone was shouting something, but she couldn't make out the words over the noise of the fire. Then she heard the most beautiful sound in the world, sirens loud and close. The fire department had finally arrived. Riley looked down and saw the big red trucks pulling up to the building, firefighters jumping out and moving quickly to set up their equipment. "Up here!" Riley screamed as loud as she could, waving her arms out the window. "I need help. There's an unconscious woman." One of the firefighters looked up and saw her. He immediately started barking orders to his team, and within minutes, they had positioned their own, much taller ladder against the building. Riley had never been so happy to see anyone in her life. 2 firefighters came up the ladder, moving quickly and efficiently. The first one climbed through the window while the second stayed positioned outside to help with the rescue. The firefighter, who entered the apartment, was a large man with kind eyes visible through his protective mask. "Ma'am, I'm Captain Rodriguez," he said, his voice muffled by his breathing equipment. "You did an incredible job getting this far, but we need to get you both out of here right now. This building is not stable." As if to prove his point, another rumbling sound echoed through the structure, and Riley felt the floor vibrate beneath her feet. Captain Rodriguez quickly assessed the unconscious woman and then looked at Riley. "Can you make it down the ladder?" On your own? He asked. Riley nodded, though she wasn't entirely sure it was true. Her legs felt like jelly, and she was having trouble catching her breath. But she knew the firefighters needed to focus on getting the grandmother out safely. I'll go first, she said, climbing back out through the window. The firefighter's ladder was much more stable than the construction ladder she had used earlier, but Riley's hands were shaking so badly she could barely grip the rungs. Step by step, she made her way down, with firefighters at the bottom ready to catch her if she fell. When her feet finally touched the ground, Riley's legs gave out, and she collapsed onto the pavement. Paramedics rushed over to her immediately, putting an oxygen mask over her face and checking her vital signs. Through the clear plastic mask, she could see the firefighters working to get the grandmother down safely. They had rigged up a special rescue stretcher, and Captain Rodriguez and his partner were carefully maneuvering the unconscious woman out of the window. It was slow work, but they were professionals, and Riley watched with relief as they successfully brought her down to the waiting ambulance. Little Tommy broke free from the woman who had been watching him and ran over to where the paramedics were loading his grandmother into the ambulance. "Is Grandma going to be okay?" he asked, his voice small and scared. One of the paramedics, a young woman with gentle hands, knelt down to Tommy's level. "We're going to take very good care of her," she said. "She's going to the hospital where the doctors will help her feel better." Riley tried to stand up, but the paramedic treating her gently pushed her back down. "You need to go to the hospital too," he said. "You've inhaled a lot of smoke, and we need to make sure your lungs are okay." "But I feel fine," Riley protested, though even as she said it, she knew it wasn't entirely true. Her throat felt like sandpaper, and she kept coughing. "You saved 2 lives tonight," the paramedic said. "Let us take care of you now." As they loaded Riley into the second ambulance, she heard a sound that made her turn her head quickly. A third explosion, smaller than the first but still powerful, shook the building. Flames shot out of the windows on the ground floor, and she could see the firefighters quickly backing away from the structure. If she had waited even 5 more minutes, if she had hesitated just a little longer, she and the grandmother would have been trapped in that inferno. The thought made her shiver, but it also filled her with something she couldn't quite name. Relief, maybe, or pride. She had trusted her instincts, and because of that, 2 people were still alive. As the ambulance pulled away from the scene, Riley looked back at the burning building one last time. Tomorrow she would wake up in a hospital bed not knowing that her life was about to change in ways she could never imagine. Riley woke up in a hospital bed with sunlight streaming through the window and the familiar sound of medical equipment beeping softly around her. For a moment she was confused. This wasn't her bedroom. Then the memories came flooding back. The explosion, the ladder, the smoke, little Tommy's frightened face, and his grandmother lying unconscious on the kitchen floor. She tried to sit up, but her chest felt tight and her throat was raw. A nurse she didn't recognize came over to check on her. "Good morning," the woman said with a warm smile. "How are you feeling?" "Like I've been breathing sandpaper," Riley croaked, her voice barely above a whisper. "What time is it? How long have I been here?" "It's almost noon," the nurse replied, checking Riley's IV and making notes on her chart. "You've been here since last night. The doctors wanted to keep you for observation because of the smoke inhalation. Your oxygen levels are much better now, though." Riley's mind was still foggy, but she remembered the most important thing. The little boy and his grandmother. Are they okay? The nurse's smile grew wider. "The boy is perfectly fine. Just some minor smoke exposure, nothing serious. His grandmother is in the ICU, but she's stable and expected to make a full recovery. The doctor said if you hadn't gotten her out when you did, she probably wouldn't have made it." Relief washed over Riley like a warm wave. She had done it. Despite being terrified, despite having no training for that kind of rescue, she had actually saved 2 lives. It still didn't feel real. "There's been a steady stream of visitors wanting to see you," the nurse continued. "Reporters, neighbors from the building, even the mayor's office called. But we've been turning everyone away so you could rest. There is one gentleman, though, who's been here since early this morning. He says he's the little boy's father. He's..." been very patient, but he really wants to thank you personally." Riley nodded, still trying to process everything. She had never thought of herself as a hero. She was just a nurse who had done what felt right in the moment. The idea that people were calling her a hero felt strange and overwhelming. A few minutes later, a tall man in his mid-30s walked into her room. He was well-dressed but looked like he hadn't slept all night. His eyes were red-rimmed and his hair was messy, as if he'd been running his hands through it constantly. "Miss Chen?" he said softly. "I'm David Kim, Tommy's father. I don't even know where to begin." Riley could see he was struggling to keep his emotions in check. "Please sit down," she said, gesturing to the chair beside her bed. "How's Tommy doing? Is he scared?" David sat down heavily, as if all the stress of the past 24 hours had suddenly caught up with him. "He's doing amazingly well, actually. He keeps talking about the nice nurse lady who helped him climb down the ladder. He says you were very brave." "I didn't feel brave," Riley admitted. "I was terrified the entire time." "That's exactly what makes it brave," David said, his voice thick with emotion. "I was in Tokyo on a business trip when it happened. When I got the call about the explosion, I thought I had lost everything. My mother, my son, they're all I have left since my wife passed away 3 years ago." Riley felt her heart clench. She couldn't imagine what it must have been like for him, being thousands of miles away when his family was in danger. "The firefighters told me what you did," David continued. "They said you climbed up there with a construction ladder, got Tommy out, then went back for my mother even though the building was ready to collapse. They said you risked your life for 2 strangers. They weren't strangers once I met them," Riley said simply. "Tommy is a sweet little boy, and your mother, I could see how much he loved her. I couldn't just leave her there." David was quiet for a long moment, staring at his hands. When he looked up again, there were tears in his eyes. "I've been trying to figure out how to thank you. How do you thank someone for giving you back your family? I've been thinking about it all night, and I keep coming back to the same thing." He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a business card, handing it to Riley. The card was simple but elegant, with the logo of a company called Kim Foundation. "I run a non-profit foundation," David explained. "We focus on emergency preparedness and disaster response training. For the past year, I've been trying to launch a new program that would train ordinary citizens in basic emergency response techniques. The idea is that in situations like what happened yesterday, regular people could help save lives while waiting for professional responders to arrive." Riley looked at the business card, not sure where this conversation was heading. "The problem is," David continued, "I've been looking for the right person to head up this program. Someone with medical training, obviously, but also someone who understands what it's like to be in a real emergency situation. Someone who knows how to stay calm under pressure and make life or death decisions." Riley's eyes widened as she began to understand what he was suggesting. "I've been interviewing candidates for months," David said. "People with impressive resumes and years of experience. But none of them had what I was really looking for. They had the knowledge, but they didn't have the heart. They didn't have the instinct to put someone else's life before their own safety." He leaned forward in his chair, his expression earnest and hopeful. "What you did yesterday showed me everything I needed to know about who you are as a person. You have the medical background to understand emergency situations, but more importantly, you have the courage to act when action is needed." Riley was speechless. She had expected a simple thank you, maybe a fruit basket or flowers. She hadn't expected a job offer. "I know this is sudden," David said, seeming to read her thoughts. "And I know you probably love your job at the hospital, but this would be a chance to save lives on a much bigger scale. We could train thousands of people across the country, maybe even internationally. Think about how many more Tommies and Mrs. Kims could be saved if more people knew what to do in an emergency." Riley's mind was racing. The offer was tempting, but it was also overwhelming. She had been a pediatric nurse for 8 years. It was all she knew, all she had ever wanted to do. "I can see you're thinking about it," David said with a small smile. "That's good. I don't want you to make a decision right now anyway. Take some time to recover, think it over, maybe do some research on our foundation. But Riley, I want you to know that this isn't just a job offer. This is a chance to turn what happened yesterday into something that could help save countless lives in the future. He stood up to leave, then turned back one more time. Whatever you decide, I want you to know that my family will be forever grateful for what you did. You gave us back our lives, and we'll never forget that. After he left, Riley lay back in her hospital bed, staring at the business card in her hands. 24 hours ago, she had been a tired nurse just trying to get home after a long shift. Now, she was being offered the chance to completely change her career and possibly impact thousands of lives. She had no idea that this was just the beginning of how much her life was about to change. 3 weeks later, Riley stood in front of the mirror in her small apartment, adjusting her blazer for the third time. Today was her first day as Director of Emergency Response Training for the Kim Foundation, and she was more nervous than she had been climbing that ladder into a burning building. The decision hadn't been easy. For 2 weeks after leaving the hospital, she had gone back to her regular nursing shifts, but everything felt different. Her colleagues treated her like a celebrity. Patients asked for her autograph, and the local news station kept calling for interviews. But more than that, she couldn't stop thinking about David's offer. She had spent hours researching the Kim Foundation, learning about their work in disaster preparedness and community safety programs. The more she read, the more excited she became about the possibility of teaching people to save lives. When she finally called David to accept the position, she felt like she was stepping off a cliff into the unknown. Her first day was overwhelming, in the best possible way. The foundation's offices were modern and bright, filled with dedicated people who genuinely cared about making communities safer. David introduced her to the team, and Riley was amazed to discover that her story had already inspired several new volunteers to join their mission. We've had more people contact us about volunteer training in the past 3 weeks than in the previous 6 months, explained Jennifer, the foundation's program coordinator. Everyone wants to learn from the woman who saved Tommy and Mrs. Kim. Riley blushed at the attention, but she was beginning to understand that her actions had become something bigger than just one rescue. People saw her story and realized that ordinary individuals could make extraordinary differences in emergency situations. Her first project was developing a curriculum for basic emergency response training that could be taught to anyone, regardless of their background. Riley drew on her nursing experience, but also on those terrifying moments when she had to make split-second decisions with no training manual to guide her. The most important thing, she told her first training class 2 months later, is not to freeze when someone needs help. You don't have to be a hero, you just have to be willing to try. The class was held in a community center downtown, not far from where the apartment fire had happened. 25 people had signed up, ranging from college students to retirees. Riley taught them basic first aid, how to recognize signs of smoke inhalation, and most importantly, how to stay calm in crisis situations. One of her students was Maria, a grocery store cashier whose apartment building had no fire escape plan. I always wondered what I would do if something happened, Maria said after the class. Now I feel like I could actually help instead of just panicking. Word about Riley's training program spread quickly through the city. Local newspapers wrote articles about the foundation's work, and soon other cities were asking if they could start similar programs. Within 6 months, Riley was traveling across the country, training instructors who would take the program back to their own communities. The work was exhausting but incredibly rewarding. Every few weeks, Riley would get a call or email from somewhere in the country. Someone who had taken her training had helped during a car accident, or performed CPR on a neighbor, or helped evacuate people from a flooded building. Each story reminded her why she had made the career change. 1 year after the apartment fire, Riley received a call that made her cry tears of joy. A woman in Portland had used techniques from Riley's training program to save 3 children from a house fire. The woman had seen smoke coming from her neighbor's window, remembered Riley's lessons about staying low and checking for hot doors, and had successfully led the kids to safety through a back entrance. I kept thinking about that nurse from the news, the woman told a local reporter. If she could climb a ladder to save strangers, I could help my neighbors. Riley realized that her impact was growing far beyond what she had ever imagined. It wasn't just about the people she trained directly, but about creating a mindset where helping others in emergencies became natural instead of scary. The foundation grew rapidly under Riley's leadership. What had started as a simple training program expanded into comprehensive emergency preparedness initiatives. They partnered with schools to teach children age-appropriate safety skills, worked with businesses to improve their emergency response plans, and even created special programs for elderly communities. 2 years after that life-changing day, Riley stood on stage at a national conference on emergency preparedness, addressing an audience of 500 people from across the country. She still felt nervous speaking in public, but her message was too important to let fear stop her. 2 years ago, I was just a tired nurse driving home from work, she told the audience. I had no special training in rescue operations, no experience with building fires, and definitely no desire to climb ladders. But when I saw a child who needed help, I made a choice. That choice didn't just save 2 lives that day. It taught me that every single one of us has the power to make a difference. In the audience, she spotted some familiar faces. Tommy, now 9 years old and healthy, sat with his grandmother and father. Mrs. Kim had made a complete recovery and had become one of the Foundation's most enthusiastic supporters. Tommy had grown taller and more confident, but he still remembered the day a kind nurse had helped him down a scary ladder. After her speech, Riley was approached by a young man who looked familiar. It took her a moment to recognize him. He had been one of the bystanders on the street that night, someone who had watched her climb the ladder but felt helpless to do anything. I've been thinking about that night for 2 years, he said. I felt so useless just standing there while you risked your life. That's why I became a paramedic. I wanted to make sure that next time I'd be able to help instead of just watching. Stories like his had become common. Riley's actions that night had inspired not just individual acts of bravery, but career changes, volunteer commitments, and a general shift in how people thought about their responsibilities to help others. The Foundation's programs had now trained over 50,000 people across 43 states. Riley estimated that these trained individuals had been involved in saving at least 300 lives in various emergency situations. The ripple effect of that one terrifying night continued to spread outward, touching lives she would never even know about. As Riley drove home from the conference, she passed by the street where the apartment building used to stand. A small memorial park had been built on the site with a plaque commemorating the night that had changed so many lives. Sometimes she stopped there to think about how different her life had become. She was no longer the exhausted nurse who just wanted to go home and order takeout. She was someone who had discovered that the scariest moments in life often lead to the most meaningful ones. She had learned that being brave doesn't mean not being afraid. It means choosing to help even when you're terrified. Riley smiled as she pulled into her driveway. Tomorrow she would start planning a new program to train teachers in emergency response. Next month she was flying to California to help set up training centers in earthquake-prone areas. Her calendar was full of opportunities to help people prepare for the unexpected. She had never imagined that one split-second decision to help a stranger would reshape her entire life's purpose, but she couldn't be more grateful for where that moment of courage had led her.